Hello, I'm Catherine Franklin, co-chair of the School of Education's Centennial Committee and faculty member of the Department of Teaching and Learning. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you, students, alumni, staff, faculty, administrators, the college and Harlem community at large, guests and friends, welcome. 100 years ago, in 1921, the world was recovering from the influenza pandemic and from the aftermath of World War I. In the midst of all of this change, City College's Board of Trustees formally established our School of Education. Today, 100 years later, 2021, the School of Education celebrates its centennial with the theme, Educating for Democracy in a Diverse World. This speaks to our collective and steadfast determination, past, present, and beyond, to educate teachers and school leaders who are prepared to teach and to inspire all children in our city schools and beyond. We will now proceed with this evening's event. Please know that if you have a question, please use the question and answer link on the right side of your screen. We will work to address the question. It is my true honor to introduce Vincent Boudreau, President of the City College of New York. Thank you.
President Boudreau is not with us yet. Maybe Dean Lamboy would like to start.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Edwin Lamboy, and I'm the Dean of the City College School of Education. I'd like to begin by sharing with all of you how saddened everyone in the School of Education and in the CCNY community is due to the passing of an illustrious alum, General Colin Powell. The terrible loss of such an inspiring public servant and leader will be felt for many years to come. Our condolences to his family and to our colleagues in the CCNY Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership. Nonetheless, the centennial celebration continues. As the new dean of the CCNY School of Education, it has been a true privilege to commemorate this remarkable milestone. We have honored our alumni, who have made and continue to make a difference in the lives of New York City's children and youth, and who value, appreciate, and learn from the diversity that characterizes our city. We have also reaffirmed our past, present, and future commitment to prepare teachers and school leaders who are equipped with the skills needed to teach all children in our city, in our country, and around the world. This celebration began unofficially over a year ago with a series of Zoom events organized by the Workshop Center subcommittee of the Centennial Committee. One of these events focused on outdoor learning and the impact that connecting with nature has on learning and social emotional development among children. In December of last year, as part of our Bordner Distinguished Speaker Series in Urban Education, we invited a panel of scholars and teacher educators to present their ideas about teaching and learning in a time of radical uncertainty and dislocation. And we asked them, now what? Then in February of this year, we explored segregation in New York City schools and how we could promote equity, integration, and justice. A month later, we officially kicked off our 100th anniversary celebration with Linda Darlingham as keynote speaker. Her thought-provoking talk made us reflect on what it means to educate for democracy in a diverse world, which is the central theme of our centennial. And just last week, We gather to learn about the history of the Teachers of Tomorrow Club. We connect with former members and hear directly from our students what we can do to serve them better. We have hosted many other events, and there will be a few more. Despite a terrible pandemic that has touched every single one of us in unimaginable ways, we came together, channeled our energy, and shared our history. This history includes our programs, for example, many of which have been recognized nationwide. For example, our bilingual education program, early childhood education, educational leadership, educational theater, and special education. It also includes our colleagues, faculty and staff who give their very best every day to mentor our students and create an environment conducive to their academic and professional growth. And finally, our story would not be complete without our former faculty and staff, alumni, and the Education Alumni Association. Please note that the CCNY School of Education is what it is today because of you. This celebration has also given us the opportunity to acknowledge that there is a lot of work to be done and imagine new ways to do it. It is impossible to predict what public education and teacher education will look like 100 years from now, but I am certain that our mission to prepare knowledgeable, reflective, and caring educators who are qualified and committed to teaching and leading diverse communities will remain at the very front and center of our work. In a few minutes, my colleague Dina Lopez will introduce our guest speaker for today, Ofelia Garcia. But I don't want to miss this opportunity to share with you a personal story involving Ofelia. I met Ofelia in 1999 at the 17th Conference on Spanish in the United States in Miami. I was quite nervous because I was an ABD presenting my second paper ever at a national conference, but also because Ofelia and some of the gods and goddesses of Spanish linguistics and Spanish in the United States were attending the conference as well. They all went to my talk. And to this day, I have no idea how I got through it. But for some reason, the ideas flowed and I didn't make any mistakes as I placed my transparencies on the overhead projector. And yes, I know I'm dating myself. At the end of the panel session, Ofelia approached me, introduced herself, congratulated me, and even asked me for a copy of my paper. Ofelia, that meant so much to me. We all admire you for your incredible work and your stellar accomplishments, but many of us also admire you for your kindness and humbleness and for the support you gave us during the early stages of our careers. I couldn't think of a better person to close our centennial celebration. Could anybody please tell me if President Boudreau is here so I can introduce him?
Not yet.
Not yet.
But
so I am moving forward, going ahead, and I am going to introduce my colleague, Dina Lopez. Dina.
Thank you, Dean Lamboy. Buenas tardes a todos. Good evening, everyone. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Ofelia Garcia as the closing keynote speaker for our School of Education Centennial Celebration. Before I go on to describe Dr. Garcia's highly impressive CV, her long list of awards and accomplishments, and the significant impact of her work in the fields of bilingual education, language policy, and the sociology of language, I want to begin with just a brief personal anecdote. 13 years ago, I was in my second year as a doctoral student, and I was attending Ofelia Garcia's brown bag lecture in one of the stately conference rooms at Teachers College, Columbia University. The room was full of graduate students and faculty, all eager to hear her talk on the recent shifts in U.S. language and educational policy. Over the course of the next hour, we were all enlightened on what Ofelia called the, quote, silencing of bilingualism. That is, the ways in which the word bilingual had been systematically eliminated from U.S. institutional names and policy documents and replaced with English language acquisition. We also learned about the language policies that affected emergent bilingual students and their families. And this term, emergent bilingual, is also another one of Ofelia's many contributions that led our field to think in new ways. Rather than view bilingual children from a deficit perspective and see them only in terms of what they don't know, as English language learners, Ofelia's work centers bilingual children and recognizes their bilingualism as a strength and resource. As I listened, I thought about the fact that I had been involved in language education for over 10 years, but had never considered the broader policy context and how it might affect practice at the local level. I decided right then and there that I just had to take a course with Professor Garcia the following spring. Little did I know that this would be the start of one of the most important, powerful mentoring relationships in my life. I would go on to take her course, co-author a book chapter with her, and years later, even get to work with her on a research project. As a first-generation immigrant Latina academic, working with and being mentored by Ofelia over the past decade has transformed my sense of self and my trajectory as a scholar. I want to publicly acknowledge my immense gratitude and say, gracias, querida Ofelia. I am deeply honored and humbled to be able to share a bit about her with you today. Dr. Ofelia Garcia is the professor emerita in the PhD programs of Urban Education and of Latin American, Iberian, and Latino cultures at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. She is internationally known for her work on bilingual education, language policy, multilingualism, and the sociology of language. She has taught all of us about the concepts of dynamic bilingualism and translanguaging. These concepts, like the rest of her work, have helped educators understand the complex language practices of bilingual students and communities. Colin Baker from the University of Wales has referred to her as, quote, an intellectual heavyweight, and, quote, the #1 leader of bilingualism and bilingual education for more than 3 decades. Ofelia Garcia's scholarly work is informed by her own biography and grounded in her life experience living in New York City after leaving Cuba at the age of 11, teaching language minority students bilingually, educating bilingual and ESL teachers, and working with doctoral students throughout her career. She began her academic career in the 1980s here at the City College of New York at our very own School of Education, where she was a faculty member in the bilingual education program for 15 years. She then went on to become Dean of the School of Education at the Brooklyn campus of the Long Island University, and then Professor of Bilingual Education at the at Teachers College, Columbia University, before heading back to her public university roots at the CUNY Graduate Center. She has authored hundreds of articles and dozens of books, including the groundbreaking text, Bilingual Education in the 21st Century, A Global Perspective, Translanguaging, Language, Bilingualism, and Education, which was the recipient of the 2015 British Association of Applied Linguistics Book Award. Other books include the Encyclopedia of Bilingual and Multilingual Education, the Translanguaging Classroom, Translanguaging with Multilingual Students with our very own Professor Tatiana Klein, Educating Emergent Bilinguals with Joanne Kleifkin, the Handbook of Language and Ethnic Identity with Joshua Fishman, Imagining Multilingual Schools with Tove Skatnap-Kangas and Maria Torres Guzman, A Reader in Bilingual Education with Colin Baker, among others. From 2011 to 2019, Ofelia led the CUNY New York State Initiative on Emergent Bilinguals, a research and professional development project that worked with schools across New York State to use bilingualism as a resource and develop multilingual school ecologies. Dr. Garcia's list of awards and accolades is just as impressive as her publication record. In 2016, she received an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Bank Street Graduate School of Education. And in 2017, she received the Charles Ferguson Award in Applied Linguistics from the Center of Applied Linguistics and the Lifetime Career Award from the Bilingual Education SIG of the American Education Research Association. The 2019 issue of the Journal of Multilingual Education Research entitled The Power of Voice, Contributions of Ofelia Garcia to Language Education is a tribute to Ofelia as a scholar and as a mentor. The list goes on, but I believe you get the picture. We are in the company of brilliance. But what you might not know, unless you know her personally, is that Ofelia, apart from being an intellectual giant and a rock star academic, is just an incredible human being. She is warm, genuine, caring, has the best sense of humor, and an incomparable generosity of spirit. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ofelia Garcia back to City College, back to the place where it all began. Thank you.
Before we hear from Dr. Ofelia Garcia, we're fortunate that our president, Vincent Boudreau, has arrived, and I thought he would say a few words of welcome. Thank you for arriving, President.
Catherine, what you mean to say is we're fortunate that your president finally figured it out after all these months on Zoom. Sorry, folks, I clicked the wrong link and was in a waiting room that had no exit door. I'm thrilled to be here. And Dr. Garcia, welcome back to City College. I remember you from my earlier years as a faculty member on campus, and it's a thrill to have you back on campus. I want to say one thing about this. This is, of course, one of the premier events in a year-long commemoration celebration of the 100-year anniversary of the School of Education. And it is a school that has really made it its mission to figure out how we effectively deliver education that is equitable in a multicultural, in unevenly resourced, unevenly experienced society. And it is a mission that is a quintessential City College mission, and a mission really, when you go back to the beginning of the School of Education, early on in the 1920s and 1930s, there was already path-breaking moves to figure out educational pedagogies that worked for, here's this phrase again from City College history, that worked for the whole people. And what I would like to share with you is, among the efforts that we have on campus in diversity, equity, and inclusion, earlier this week, we had someone come in to talk to us about hiring practices and how we put search committees together in ways that are not biased and that identify different ways of expressing talent and different identifications of potential, and how we signal our mission to candidates. And so the person, not with any particular allegiance to any individual school or department, said, I want to show you something about a place that's doing this right. And there it was, shared screen, the mission statement, the diversity statement, the anti-racism statement of the School of Education. And so, not as a set piece display for the 100-year anniversary, or not for an accreditation event, but because the faculty members of the School of Education, absolutely in line with their 100-year tradition of meeting these vital needs, sat down several years ago and said, we need to take what is most important in our mission at this moment and make it a public document. And so that's what we when we celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the School of Education. That's what we celebrate. We celebrate a century of accomplishment and commitment and insight. And there is no better way of doing that than for us all to sit back and enjoy and then learn from the insights, the experience, and the expertise of Dr. Garcia. So my big job after arriving late is to get out of the way, and I'm happy to do that now. Dr. Garcia, the microphone is yours. Welcome, everybody.
Bueno, muchas gracias, President Boudreau. I was very touched by Dina's words and also by Edwin's words. To me, having been invited to speak to you is probably the biggest honor I've had in my career, because to me, City College is a very special place. It's a place actually where I became a person. I met a husband. I had children. I had colleagues. And so I always say City College taught me everything I know, my colleagues, my students, and I hold City College very close to my heart. So thank you very much for giving me this honor of celebrating with you the centennial of the School of Education that formed me, because I think that our participation in universities and programs is what really shapes faculty, not only the students that we teach, and formed me as a person and formed me as a mother and as a wife and everything else that comes along with it. I am not quite 100 years old, but I have been at the school of, I was at the School of Education 40 years ago. So there's a lot that I can share. And I thought today what I would do, because I could not skip the history, right? The history of the School of Education at City College, and especially how it impacted me as a Latina woman during those years, 1981 to 1997. And then I think, because you have to hear something from me, I think I want to focus on the biggest lesson I learned at City College, which was about language and bilingualism, and focus again on how language has really been manipulated as a tool of racial linguistic ideologies to really exclude, and how faculty in the School of Education and students have fought back about it. And to do that, I start with the beginnings of City College, but then I want to focus on the experiences of a particular teacher with her students, because I think that would help us think about language otherwise, and unpack a little bit this word that you've been hearing from Dina, translanguaging, and to see how the potential is for racialized students, and especially racialized bilingual students. So let me first tell you a little bit about CCNY and my experience. I came to City College in 1981 into the bilingual education program. It was a most exciting time. It was a time of fervor. It was a time of activism. It was a time of students demanding things, with colleagues who really were completely grounded in the Harlem community and the Washington Heights community at that point. It's where I met Ricardo Tegui, who was the program head then. It's where I met Gerardo Torres, who recently passed away, but who taught us so much about Puerto Rico, especially about Latin American scholars and poetry also at the same time, and Carol Joseph. And I want to say something about that, because from the very beginning, the bilingual education program at City College had the distinction of including Haitian scholars and Haitian education as a bilingual issue. And I say that because today, when I look back, there has been some criticism of bilingual education be an anti-Blackness and how that all relates. And I always think back that from the beginning, City College School of Education bilingual program had this at the center, because Carol Joseph was such an important part of our faculty. And then, of course, Diana Caballero was hired. Diana had strong roots in the community. She was the chair of what was then called the Puerto Rican Latino Education Roundtable, and Guillermo Linares, who started Dominicanos Progresistas. So it was a very active bilingual education program, I think much like the one that you have today, and you've been able to shape and you've been able to continue. But there was tremendous commitment to the Latinx community, to the Harlem community, to the teachers and schools. We often talked about the fact that what we were doing was hacer pueblo, right? To make community. And we worked with both Dominicanos Progresistas and Educadores del Pueblo in the South Bronx very, very closely. And the idea was to open up a space within the School of Education for the Harlem community, with the support of old colleagues from different programs, by the way, different departments. Puerto Rican and Latino studies was very near to us, so was Black Studies, so was the Spanish department, and so were many other departments in the college at that time. But, you know, I want to focus on the two important principles that I learned at City College, because they're principles that I've never forgotten and have been at the center of my work. One was what they always called building on the strength of children. And I would be curious as to how much that message has continued, because of course, this was the core of Lillian Weber's work at the Workshop Center that you all must have heard about. And you know, when my children think about City College, they ask me, how is the Workshop Center? And they remember Lillian's plants, Lillian's kitchen, Lillian's pretend spaces where she engaged the faculty also in play, because she wanted us to remember what it was to imagine to be children. And Henny's dark room, Henny Wong's dark room, was also something that's always very pleasant in their mind. But anyway, this idea of building on the strength of children was very, very present. And it's difficult to name people. I know we spoke earlier with Leonard Dean Beckham, that I very much remember, who led the School of Education during this time. And I don't want to mention too many people, because then I skip people, but I do want to mention Miriam Dorn, who was chair, and thank you very much, Catherine Franklin, for the introduction to all this. She was chair of what was then elementary education department during the time there. And Miriam was had been raised in a bilingual school in Winnipeg. And so and she had all this Yiddish activism in her. So it was interesting how the progressiveness of Lillian Weber and the Yiddish activism of Miriam Dorn came together to really push forward the bilingual education program. I also remember, so I talk about building on the strengths of children as very important, and I talk about the connection to community as extremely important. And one of the first things that happened to me when I walked into City College was that I was asked by an ed whose last name I can't remember, to start an adult literacy program. And you know, I do remember Brenda Jack, who was the program director. But I do remember what the women taught me. There were women from the community, from the Harlem community. And I do remember especially one woman one day who came because she wanted to get into the GED program. And I said to her, well, you can't quite get into the GED program because you first have to go into the adult basic education program and then pass the what was then called the TABE locator, so that you can get into the GED program. And one day she came and she said, okay, Ophelia, I passed. Now I passed the test. Now teach me how to read. And that to me was a revelation. Here was this woman who we thought was not literate enough to join a GED program, and high school equivalency program. And yet she knew the difference between passing a test and knowing how to read. And she knew that we could teach her to pass the test, but that was not what she wanted from reading. She wanted to be able to have meaning from poetry and all the rest that was around her. So anyway, those two things come to mind when I think of City College, because there are things that grew so deeply inside of me that I was never able to abandon them. I was then at City College when Clapper Hall came tumbling down. We were in a separate building where your parking lot is now at the corner. And when we moved to NAC, to the North Academic Center in 1984, where for the first time we were really integrated into the City College community. So all of these things that I remember so very, very clearly. And then all the students taught me. I remember Altagracia, whose husband used to turn off the light and she couldn't study. Carol Sanon, who wanted me to really know Haitian Creole. And even Jesus Fraga, who later became part of your faculty. So 1981 through 1997, just to remind you, were years of struggle, right? There was a lot of tension, but there was this incredible commitment from the School of Education faculty. who, by the way, did not look like the community, but yet there was this commitment to this community. I want to remind you that this was after open admissions, which happened in 1970, and after tuition, which happened in 1976. I also remember some tension with some faculty back then, and you probably don't even remember or think of this, but back then we used to have to go on Fridays, or maybe it was Thursday, to pick up our checks. And we used to stand in line in front of the administration building. And I remember one day when I was telling someone online how happy I was. I had just been hired at City College. And a faculty member, an older faculty member, turned around and said to me, "You're happy here?" I said, "Yes, this is a wonderful place and there's so much happening and I'm so happy that," and he said, and he sort of said, "Huh?" I said, "What? You're not happy here?" And he said, "This is not what I signed up to do." And I thought very hard about that, because I thought, gee, the day that I feel that this is not what I signed up to do, I don't want to be here. So I just point this out because this was not a time of peace in a lot of ways. It was a time of struggle, but it was a time of tremendous commitment. In 1989, you probably remember or you know about students took over, there were takeovers. The community center that was recently closed actually was opened. And I do remember in 1995, the Save the Open Admissions March, after Governor Pataki eliminated SEEK and college discovery, reduced the tuition assistance program and increased tuition and made cuts to the budget. Clearly, during the time I was there, also all of this commitment was from the faculty of education, especially, was very strong. But clearly, there was an abandonment of this commitment to the poor and working class New Yorkers that City College had always stood for. And of course, this resulted in the elimination of open admissions later on in 99. But what I really wanted to talk to you about, but I couldn't talk to City College in a City College Centennial before, without mentioning how deeply impacted I was by what was going on at City College and by my colleagues and by my students then. But I do want to focus today on language because that's what I do. And that's what City College taught me to do. But I do want to talk about language as it has been manipulated to exclude, right? Sometimes we don't see what is happening when it's in front of our eyes, and to magnify it, we need to sort of think of the past. So I just want to give you an example from 1849, when actually the Free Academy was started, City College was started. And I want to remind you that the founder, Townsend Harris, said things like, "We're going to open the doors to all, let the children of the rich and the poor take their seats together and know of no distinction." And Horace Webster, who was the first president of City College, I'm glad that you have President Woodrow there, had said things like, "The experiment is to be tried whether the children of the people, the children of the whole people, can be educated, and whether an institution of the highest grade can be successfully controlled by the popular will." So I just want you to focus on what was said. Open to all, no distinction, children of the whole people, controlled by popular will. And yet, it's very clear to us, there were no women, not even anyone of the Christian faith, because there was mandatory chapel attendance at that time. And of course, there were no racial minorities, right? And this is, to me, a clear example of what Boaventura de Sousa Santos, the decolonial Portuguese thinker, calls abyssal thinking. That is, thinking that what we see is reality and there is an abyss and everything else is just does not exist, is completely invisible. And I start with this because sometimes things are so in our face that we don't see them. And it's only when things are in the past that they're so magnified because it's so obvious to us that, of course, it didn't include everyone. Of course, there were distinctions. Of course, there weren't the children of the whole people. But because there were no women and only Christians, right? But little by little, City College adjusted, right? In the 1900s, it abolished mandatory chapel attendance and Jewish students started joining. In 1921, the school of 100 years ago, the School of Education was founded. It's important to note that this was just a year after women got the right to vote. And I would like to think that by the time women started being admitted to graduate programs at City College in the 30s, it was a school of education that probably fomented that change. 51, it became coeducational. But I think what's important to then understand is that in 1970, this thing happens where there's open admissions. You open the doors to all, as the founder, Horace Webster and Townsend Harris had said. There was open admissions. But at the same time, there had been a movement for civil rights, of course, and the Civil Rights Act prohibited this discrimination based on race, color, religion, or national origin. So the problem was that we didn't want all. We didn't want everybody. So how do we then exclude if we cannot exclude on the basis of race or color or religion or national origin? And what I want to propose is that the way that we have excluded has been by using language. Language was the answer. Language modeled after the ways in which usually white, male, monolinguals with institutional power used language. That became the means, the instrument, the tools to exclude, of course, measured by tests that were then said to be very objective, but that were just measuring and assessing a way of using language that was not the way of using language by the people. This becomes very, very clear in what happened with teacher education when teacher certification exams came into being. Because it was then that language then became the instrument of excluding all these community people that we were educating to be teachers for their communities, people who really knew the communities, who knew their logic, who knew their knowledge system, who knew their language, who knew their ways of being, but that did not actually use language in the ways that the test measured language, assessed language. So let me just give you an example of what happened the year actually before I left. In 1996 or 1997, the New York State teacher certification exams pass rates were 92% for white candidates, 50% for African Americans, 47% for Latinos. And as a matter of fact, 1/3 of the students who took the test in New York City failed. Now, the only difference, it was not the institution, the only difference between New York City and the rest of the state is that New York City had the highest rate of African American and Latino teacher candidates taking the test. New York State Education Department then made a ruling saying that they were going to deregister all schools of education if fewer than 80% of their graduates who completed and graduated passed the teacher certification exams. And of course, this meant that there would be very few teacher candidates of color and very few bilingual teachers, right? So the City College School of Education was at a crossroad. All of a sudden, this became a real issue because some faculty felt that perhaps the test had to be given before admissions. But if you give the test before admission, or if you give a test like the test before admission, which is eventually what we did, well, then you're really not educating. What was really interesting about City College during this exciting time that I lived was that we really developed a lot of teachers who were community people, but that needed to have their linguistic repertoire extended, but not adjusted to what the authorities wanted. So I want to remind you that we have used language to exclude. My experience was that from one year to the next, instead of having a cohort of bilingual teachers, candidates, we had 6 teachers that we could admit, 6 teacher candidates that we could admit, because we were going crazy trying to figure out how we're going to get these teachers to really pass this test. This is when I started to think that maybe this is not what I signed up to do, and I left City College, always with the good lessons that I had learned in terms of finding strengths and in terms of commitment to community. So let me just then think a little bit about today with you, and think about how language continues to be used as a tool for exclusion in education. And want to suggest to you that it's being used as a cloak, as a veil, you know, and here I'm borrowing from W.E. Du Bois, who always talked about the veil that had to be lifted. But language acts as a veil to hide and normalize exclusions and racial linguistic ideologies. And I think that all of us in education know how English language standards have been constructed, how this thing of what is called academic language, that nobody really knows what it is, despite the many descriptions of it. But teachers always tell you that that's the reason why students are failing, right? Because they don't have academic language. But I want you to reflect on what academic language is, which is the descriptions are just the language of text written by professionals, usually white males most of the time, and therefore does not reflect the language use of most people, right? And how, of course, this academic language has then formed the notion of accountability, especially since No Child Left Behind and the many standardized exams that are given to children. So I think what we have to realize is that we set up things in ways that not everyone can meet them. And then as a result, not only are people excluded, but we produce subjectivities of inferiority, of failure, of racialization, and we produce the achievement gap, the word gap, right? It's all produced by this construction of language. So let me then think of a teacher, because in order to think about this, it's good to always think of someone. And we've gone through this, right? And it moved so quickly during after the new century. It moved and moved and moved and moved. And we came to 2020, and then there was a disruption, right? There was a pause, right? There was a pause due to COVID-19, remote learning, the policies were completely disrupted. And then, of course, in May 2020, the murder of George Floyd. So I want to introduce you to, could be a City College teacher and her student, And her name is Miss Jones, just so that we remember her. She's a white teacher. She's a monolingual ESL teacher teaching 5th grade. And she has one student. She has many students in her class, but I want you to think of this one student. Her name is Julia. Julia was born and raised in Puerto Cortés, Honduras. She's Garifuna, Afro-Indigenous. She speaks both Spanish and Garifuna. She lived with her grandmother because her mother had left for the United States when she was young. But Julia was an incredible student in Puerto Cortés. She was especially good at declaiming poetry. And those of us who have Latin American roots know that this is a good tradition in schools in Latin America of declaiming poetry. So she was a great declaimer of poetry. She also played punta music, which is Garifuna music, and she actually wrote the lyrics. She was a very talented 10-year-old. And in January of 2020, after Biden was elected, and it's a long story that I won't have time to go into, she actually crossed the border. So she came into Ms. Jones' class in January, and despite all that her teachers, Dina and Tatiana and Nancy and Joseph and everybody else had taught her, I mean, Ms. Jones still looked at Julia as a problem, right? She didn't speak English, and she saw her only as a Black student who was a speaker of Spanish. This is all she knew about Julia. Well, now comes the disruption. Now, Ms. Jones had been engaged in the Me Too movement against sexual abuse. And during the Black Lives Movement, she ended up participating a lot in the protests. And she became obsessed with this idea of George Floyd saying over and over again, "I can't breathe." So all of this and the pause and the pandemic and the fact that she was alone reflecting made her start thinking, seeing things differently. Now, how was she able to see things differently? Well, she was able now through remote learning to observe Julia in the home. And she started observing the mother, who spoke very little English, but was able to actually help Julia with her lessons, and the siblings and how they participated also in the lesson. So what happened was that Ms. Jones started stepping into Julia's own space, not expecting Julia to step into her space, right? And because she had this breathing issue in her mind, she started thinking, well, in that space, how do I let Julia breathe? So this is, this was her mantra almost. And little by little, she started seeing Julia not just as a Black female body that was inferior, but as a pretty good language performer, even if she was an emergent bilingual, an English language learner, as she was categorized. Because Julia loved to read, to write, to perform. She communicated well. She was resourceful. She knew how to use Google Translate, and she knew how to use her mother and her siblings for support wisely. She knew how to read for information and enjoyment. She had questions and was curious. She saw her one day actually submit a poetry that she had written in Spanish for her punta music, and using the Google Translate that actually Julia had taught her to use. Well, she didn't teach her to use it, but she saw how Julia was using it. She started translating this poetry, and she thought, oh my God, this child has all these metaphors that I didn't know that she had. And she also saw how Julia was able to incorporate new words from English into all her oral and written performances. That is, she started really differentiating between general language performance and performances with specific features. That is, you can be Maybe you don't speak Russian, but you might be able to use language to gather information, to tell a joke, to infer, to convince someone. So the use of language, of having this general language performances, is very different from just having performances with these specific features. And Ms. Jones started focusing on the general language performances. So by observing Julia closely, Ms. Jones realized that Julia, and then all the students, language, that is, they do language, not have language, they do language with a unitary linguistic semiotic repertoire, with a network of features and meanings that they pull together to make meaning. And she started understanding the difference between language from an external perspective, the way that it's given to us by nation states and institutions, and exams and written text, etc., and languaging from the speaker's internal perspective. So she started focusing not on the language, but on the languaging, ing. I'm focusing on the ing, borrowing the concept that the Chilean biologist Maturana and Varela came up with, saying that this was what made human communication differently from animal communication. That is, the ability to really do language in a way that also has metalinguistic functions. So she started realizing, Ms. Jones started realizing, that language has to be seen from an inside perspective, that is what students do with language, and that then language teaching was not just a simple function of adding this autonomous box, which was a language or a named language or a different dialect, but what it was just to add these new language features into a unitary linguistic semiotic repertoire, a unitary network of meanings, right, that students could then leverage, right? So it's like adding pearls to a string of a necklace, right? You keep expanding it, not adding something different. So she started understanding her teaching of English as something very different, right? Because she wasn't just teaching the language. And she started really understanding that that actually all students act and do language with this unitary repertoire of linguistic and multimodal features, and just select the features that are important at the time for the appropriate communicative situation. That the difference was that monolingual students with institutionalized power, their repertoire conforms to the repertoire of the institution, and that is not the case of racialized students. But she understood then that racialized students do not have two dialects or two languages, even if they're named like that by society, even if they're named Spanish and English, African American English and Standard English, or whatever it is, even if they're named by society this way, what speakers have internally is a network of features and meanings that they leverage to make meanings. And what was shocking to her once she realized that was to understand that in schools, students who are racialized, minoritized, do not have access to their entire repertoire. As a matter of fact, they only are allowed to use less than half of their repertoire, when other students, monolingual students with institutionalized power, usually white students, are allowed their access to their full repertoire. So all of a sudden, she understood how unfair the situation is. She understood that language, as well as race, has been produced by colonization, right? That these were categories that were constructed during the colonial processes, because there were categories of domination and power. She understood that there are never any static monolingual monoglossic texts if your students are engaged in the text. If your students are engaged in the text may be written in what society calls one language or another, or even in writing in one script or another. But when a bilingual student, any student, engages with a text, that text then becomes very dynamic. That text almost becomes bidialectal, bilingual, heteroglossic, to use the word that Bakhtin taught us to use, right? So texts really have to be understood according to a local logic derived from different knowledge systems that really must be seen and recognized. So what Ms. Jones started to do, sort of to make sure that we understand what we're doing here, is she started to understand the theory practice of translanguaging, right? What we're calling translanguaging. We talked about the ing before, about the doing of language, right? And now we're talking about the trans. Now, just to remind everybody, trans is not to go across named languages or language varieties or modes, but trans is in the sense of transcending the construct of language as having been given to us, right, by institutions. So it's transcending that. But trans is also about transcending what Aníbal Quijano, the Peruvian sociologist, called coloniality. That is the idea that even after the colonizers left, even after all the countries, Asia and Africa and Latin America before that became independent, coloniality continued because through racism, sexism, and global capitalism. And the role that language then had in creating those categories and thus silencing the histories of oppression, right? So then what did poor Ms. Jones do sort of to start making it real for us? Well, she started going through what Lillian Weber's, again, at City College in the 1980s taught us so well to do, which was to find the cracks in the system and to go through them, right? And what she started doing was, okay, how do we open up these translanguaging spaces through these cracks? How do we go through these cracks where our students can then breathe, right? Because this is the only thing that is going to produce some social and cognitive justice. If you want to read more about how this is done, I suggest that you consult the website of the project that Dina Lopez told you about earlier, the CUNY NICEP project, because again, this has deep City College roots. The project did, right? Dina Lopez participated, Tatiana Klein participated, Ricardo Tegui was the principal investigator, Kate Menken and Kate, I think, was a faculty member at some point with you, also participated. So this was all City College product, right? So we talk about translanguaging pedagogical practices consisting of 3 components. Consisting of what we call the translanguaging stance. And we use the Spanish word juntos to think about how this is all juntos, this is all together. This is a network that we need, a network of features and meanings that we need to leverage. Also, the fact that the learning happens juntos with teachers and students collaborating and being co-learners, not teaching, but being co-learners together. And then, of course, rooted in the strength that City College taught us so well to recognize the strengths of children and their communities. And the stance also has to do with making sure that students have a right to their own languaging. Notice I'm not saying they have a right to language, no. They have a right to their own languaging, the way that they use language. with their own logic and knowledge systems. They don't have to behave like monolingual elites or powerful people, right? And here's where I think W.E. Du Bois' notion of lifting the veil is important, right? Because what he taught us is that racialized people have to learn to see themselves as whole, not in comparison to anybody else, but also that others have to see them as themselves, not as they would want them to be. So certainly this is all about the translanguaging stance. And again, because Ms. Jones was so involved in the Me Too movement, and the Me Too movement has been about revealing, right? So revealing became very important to her, and revealing the racial linguistic ideologies in the curriculum and in the programs that really create the differences and the social and cognitive injustices. The other part of translanguaging pedagogical practices is what we call the translanguaging shifts. And it's the idea that there's a translanguaging corriente that is always in a classroom. Sometimes it's visible, most of the time it's invisible, but it's always there and it's their strength. And then the idea of how do teachers really connect to that corriente, to that current, and also reveal that it is there, because otherwise you don't see it, right? And for that, we proposed what we call the translanguaging design. And we focus especially on opening up translanguaging spaces to do three things, which I think all of you would understand because they're so obvious. The idea that to really observe and document what a student knows and knows how to do, you have to be able to really observe them using their entire repertoire, not just some features that you think are important, but their entire repertoire, right? Also, when you have students who are newcomers, for example, translanguaging is important as a way to scaffold the lesson. We talk about translanguaging rings. They're like lifesavers that you put on and you take off depending on what students need. Some students need it for writing, but they don't need it for speaking. So you have to be able to put it on and take it off and be able to know how to do it. But I think most important and probably most difficult is to make sure that there are spaces in which translanguaging acts to transform subjectivities, so that students know that their language practices are not only language practices for the home, but they're also language practices that have academic value, even if expressed in what you call another language or what some people call another dialect, right? And to remember that in the process of learning, translanguaging is always available. Maybe as a product, you as a teacher want to make sure that eventually this product has these features, right? Or is in this language. But through the process of learning, you have to be able to leverage everything. So let me just then sort of summarize, right? This translanguaging to reveal, to lift the veil. I think there are two principles that go along with the two principles that I told you about before: building on the strength of children and committing to communities. I think the first one is to think about language not as a box, and people as not having one box or two boxes, but really doing language with a full linguistic, semiotic, unitary repertoire. And I'm emphasizing the word unitary. And the second part is opening up a space for social and cognitive justice by revealing, lifting the veil, the injustice that racialized students language, learn, and perform in the same ways as white students with institutionalized privilege, which is not the case, right? Yeah, but they may be getting the same curriculum, the same standards, the same assessment, but they're being taught and assessed with less than half of the repertoire that they have available, which is not fair. And then for students to become critically conscious of the role of language in their own domination, the histories of domination, right? Because I think this dismantles the power hierarchies that have been established based on these categories of gender, of race, of social class, and of language. Let me just say a parenthesis before I end, which is about the relationship of translanguages to translanguaging to name languages and dialects, because sometimes people misunderstand. I know that language continues to have social and material effects, and they're important for social and identity purposes for many people. So does bilingualism and bidialectism, right? I want my grandchildren to be bilingual. I know that Dina wants her children to be bilingual. Spanish is important to me. So these are concepts that have a purpose, but what is important is to remember that none of that has a separate psycholinguistic cognitive reality for speakers. That is, it's all a network, right? This separation does not exist socially, but not psycholinguistically. Now, teachers have to be able to hold these two things in tension: the sociopolitical aspects of language that they're being taught, they're being told to teach and assess, and the cognitive aspects, the psycholinguistic aspects of how students use language. And I think that is always the answer, right? How do you look at students and see them doing language, and not always looking for whether they have this or that? So just to then summarize, the City College School of Education has really an important task in educating teachers like Ms. Jones and others who will continue to really develop students' academic performances with their full unitary repertoire. But at the same time, it's very important that they reveal the injustices, right? We have to take up what John Lewis calls get into good trouble, speak up, speak out, get in the way, especially when an arbitrary construction of language is upheld to exclude. So I think that today, more than ever, City College scholars of teaching, like all of you, really must continue to find what Professor Lillian Weber so many years ago used to call the cracks, and to create openings to educate, especially teachers who are racialized and gendered, in ways that minoritize them, but that are most important to educate the diverse communities that make up New York City today. Y muchísimas gracias. Y gracias a Minata. I didn't say thank you to you in the beginning. It's also a pleasure to see you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia. It is so wonderful to see you on the screen. I wish I could just give you a hug. I am still stuck on all of that, and we have so much to unpack when I'm still thinking about this whole notion of veiling or unveiling, if you will, and that, you know, how we have actually created some of the challenges that we are right now going through by using language to exclude in the first place. And now we created a problem, and it feels like we are kind of catching up or trying to resolve what we have created. But I still want to go back to this, to Miss Jones and Julia, because I feel like I was Julia at some point as an immigrant woman from Africa in the US classrooms. And I do wish, as you were going through the story, I was just thinking, I wish I had a Miss Jones during COVID, during the pandemic, who had the opportunity to really kind of open or unveil just the screen to look at my background and understand me even better, it probably would have changed a whole lot of things. And I think I can't help to think that pre-pandemic, Miss Jones probably wouldn't have ever thought that she could understand all these issues that she understood of Julia. But how do you recommend, now that we are in the process of reopening, in the spring we are going 70% in person, and the screens are no longer going to be there, and eventually Julia is going to go back to the classroom. Miss Jones or another Miss Jones is not going to have the opportunity to look at the screen and see the family dynamic behind Julia. How do we get those kind of teachers to see Julia in the classroom when they don't have the opportunity to look at the screen and see what's behind them for a better understanding?
I'm sure that all of you there could answer that question better than I could. And, I encourage you to participate if you have thoughts, because I think this is so important. I think that our problem always is that we are rushing and that we really believe what is handed down to us. I think that the pause that we have all had to endure has the advantage that perhaps we could work with a different time frame, and I think opening up these spaces, that's why I keep going back to Lillian Weber, because I think her lesson of the cracks, she always used to say, no, when we all complained, oh, I can't do that, I can't do that. She always used to say, come on, this system is full of cracks. You mean to tell me you can't find a crack? Find a crack and then go through it, right? So I think that's what's important. What's important is to sort of disrupt the speed with which we want things to happen, and to see inside people, not just to see what's outside, to be able to take the time to see inside and to see what their strengths are. And for that, we need time. We need, and I hope that we've learned something, Aminata, from being on screens. And I have seen so many now homes that I couldn't see before. And I think that it's very revealing, especially in the beginning when we didn't know what we were doing. So there would be dogs and children and, babies. I think it just puts a human face on things that we had not realized before. And even conferences, I now go to so many conferences where women are, have their babies and their children on top of them. And I would hope that when we go back to in person, we would carry those images with us, because I think we see each other then more like persons rather than an object that needs to be moved into this box, into this category, right? I think the most important thing is to see not categories of people and not categories of students, but to see everybody in a continuum. And it's a continuum that is not flat, that has peaks, right? And that sometimes, we may not know how to write, but we know how to sing. And, how do you find the strength in people? And this is a continuum. Not everybody works at the same level. And we have to open up that spectrum of capacities, I think.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I have another question. And by the way, participants, please feel free to use the Q&A. We will try to get through all the questions, or as many as we can. So the next question says, have you seen any concrete improvement on the ground in how speakers of more than a narrow linguistic range are viewed, appreciated, valued, compared with how they used to be?
I like to think, yes. I like to think that I think that we've gone through I'm old enough that I think we've gone through peaks and valleys, because I do think that when I stepped into City College, those were times of great political struggles, and I think I think because we were not professionalized in the same ways, there were more spaces to be you, right? So it's interesting to me how education has become more structured. Sometimes we know what we would want to do in better ways, but what we lost was the commitment to community that was there, so that everything flowed from the community up, and now everything flows from the top down. But I'd like to think that in the last 10 years, I would say, maybe, yeah, in the last 10 years, I think people have approached, especially language learners, differently. I think that both the TESOL profession and the bilingual education profession have grown tremendously. I think, for example, in bilingual education, we went through a period where, because we had lost so many political struggles, we gave up and we ended up with these dual language programs, which are sometimes just separate languages and really don't do anything for the minority community. And there's a lot of pushback on it now from, both scholars and minoritized communities that want access to those programs for their children, not just for the the English speaking white students who want in. And I see that also. So I think there has been some critical consciousness in the last years that I think we got lost with No Child Left Behind. We really got lost. We got lost with the accountability and with the global perspective and the neoliberal perspective. And I think we're coming back to reality, perhaps because we've been hit with a pandemic.
So I think we can hope that at least something positive came out of this whole pandemic, and that I think also, like you said, the last 10 years, I think researchers have pounded and published so much to make people be more aware of, people like me, what they have been going through, or Julia, so that Ms. Jones will have that opportunity to really understand her students better. And I think research is also another way to, something we can give credit to, really, in terms of highlighting all those challenges that probably before were not addressed. Maybe we were thought about or used different ways, but by you coming with these words like translanguaging, languaging, all these new it words and buzzwords are really changing what the way we think, I think. So the following question is, why colleagues, with colleagues who say, I am not a language teacher, quote unquote, what resources can we suggest that will help them to understand the importance of language in their subject area?
Right.
Especially if we're talking about New York City, where we have so many diverse students in our classrooms.
All teachers are language teachers, right? I mean, we can't, to teach history, students have to be able to understand both historical texts, written texts, and whatever discussion is going on in the classroom. So language is an instrument. That's why it's so important. And that's why I wanted to point out this danger that I think is so evident, that we have substituted language for race, because we can't exclude on the basis of race. So we have found another way of excluding, and it is it's so difficult because it's everywhere in classrooms. And yet I think we have to be able to understand that that what we do when we teach is we engage students in languaging so that they can make sense and make meaning out of what it is that they're doing. So it's impossible to teach if you don't engage with language, right? So I don't believe that there could be content teachers and language teachers. Everybody has to think of how language is affecting their what the content that they're teaching. It's very, very important.
So somebody's asking, how is translanguaging in terms of just terminologies different or similar to code switching?
Oh yeah, that's a good question that it would take me hours to answer. So I won't answer except to say that okay, I talked about the external perspective and the internal perspective. Code switching, perhaps the best way to understand it is to think of code switching as the external perspective. You have two languages and you go from English to Spanish and you can tell which is which, right? Whereas when I talk about translanguaging, I'm talking about the internal perspective. Give you an example. I have a granddaughter who's 3 years old, almost 4, Isa. Now, Isa, for example, last week, I heard her with her friend whose parents are Puerto Rican, and she had just gotten earrings, and she was telling her, pero es que yo tengo aretes, mi mamá me puso los aretes, and her friend said, sí, mi mamá mira las pantallas mías, they're so pretty. And then they were going to with the earrings. So they were doing aretes, pantallas, earrings, without thinking of what it is that they were doing. For them, they're synonyms, right? What we don't understand is that's what bilinguals do. They add synonyms, right? Except these synonyms maybe are in different languages, what we call languages. But for them, for us, they're not different codes. They are our repertoire, right? Our unitary repertoire. So I give you the example of my granddaughter because, from the external perspective, you would say, oh, she's code switching from English to Spanish, or she's code switching from Puerto Rican Spanish to Cuban Spanish. No, she's using her repertoire, and she hasn't gotten to school yet where they will tell her that you cannot say arete because it's earring, right? And when she gets to school, she'll learn that. Yeah. She's learning the social part of language. That's why I'm saying it's not that it doesn't, it exists as a social reality, but it's not it's not a cognitive reality for bilinguals. And we have to realize that when we don't accept all of the repertoire, we are limiting their ability to understand, to learn.
So if we are kind of having a challenge accepting the repertoire and letting kids be who they are, truly are really, and not force them into thinking certain ways or push them into changing how that repertoire is supposed to function, how would we deal with even the future of trilingualism, right? In the United States?
Right.
Talking about indigenous languages, Spanish, English.
Right. Well, I think that, Aminata, you as an African know that this issue of separate languages makes absolutely no sense. It's a Western logic, right? It's not an African logic of languaging, because yes, you have languages that someone has named. I can give you histories of missionaries named this the way that they speak here, they named them something. The way they speak here, they named them something else. But really, they're not separate languages. They're abilities that you have. There's a repertoire of features that you use depending on who you're interacting with, and sometimes not. So I think that one of the challenges is people always think, oh, well, how am I going to deal with bilingualism or multilingualism in classrooms in New York City? Well, it's impossible to know all the languages of the kids in a classroom anyway. So that doesn't help because I always say, thank God for some colonial languages, because at least many of the African kids have been taught in French, so you can at least group them into French, and they then work themselves out. But nothing is bilingualism, trilingualism is not sufficient, right? What is important is to be able to open up to all these different ways of languaging and to allow the students in the process of learning. Again, I want to talk about the difference between process and product. In the process of learning, give them access to all of their repertoire, and then figure out where it is you want them to end up.
I think it's really true as you were saying this, and as I have this conversation with Dr. Garcia, I'm encouraging the participants to please use the Q&A, and instead of the chat, and submit your questions. We'll try to cover as many of them as we can. You were saying this, and as you know, I'm from Senegal. I speak Wolof as my native language, and I also speak French, and then English is my really third language. And I remember when I came to this country with zero English, of course, and had to learn English from the bottom and go to college and all these things. I remember the excitement that I had and ran to my teacher, my English teacher, to say, I dreamt in English last night. First time ever. And until today, every time I think about how I switch into the different languages, it is so natural to me. Until now, if the dean called me to his office and say, let's talk about this thing and tell me numbers, I'll count in French, because it's just quick. It makes sense to me. It's fast. So I think I can relate to somebody trying to control that fluidity of how I think and process naturally. But I'm going to hold on to that, because that's probably going to be a bigger conversation at some point offline with you. So I'll move on to, we talked about some of the challenges that No Child Left Behind and accountability and testing really has actually kind of disfavored us in a way, if you will. So we wanted to check, how can translanguaging practices affect testing in the classroom? Or how would you think they would?
Testing is an issue, right? It's the biggest issue. To me, it's the most important issue right now. I think as far as formative assessment, you have to be able to use, if you want to know what a child really knows, you have to be able to accept translanguaging and use translanguaging to get to what they know, right? And I think there are people working on this right now. I mean, I can recommend the work of Laura Sensi Moreno, also at Brooklyn College, all CUNY people, who has been working a lot on formative assessment in reading, especially. Cecilia Espinosa also at Lehman, but especially reading and assessment, and formative assessment. Standardized assessment, of course, is more difficult because it's an industry, as you know. But even ETS, Educational Testing Service, is thinking of how to assess using translanguaging. And for example, Alexis Lopez at ETS has developed a math test in which because technology is now enabling us to do things differently, and basically it gives you tabs so that you can change languages when you answer, and you can change also the mode, so you don't always have to write. You can also just do it orally, answer orally, because if you're testing math, you don't have to test writing also. I mean, if you're testing math through writing, then you're really not testing just math. So I think assessment is a real challenge because, like I say, and I've said it over and over again, when you are testing monolinguals, usually you are allowing them to use almost all their full repertoire. Not all, because some things are, things that you say at home and you don't say in school, right? So not all of it, but most of it. Whereas when you're assessing anybody who is bilingual, multilingual, you're assessing them with less than half of their repertoire, right? It's a very unfair situation. So of course these students are going to do more poorly than these other students. And I think that that's the danger. The danger is to think that we have an objective measure when it is based on a principle that is unfair to begin with, right? So that's what the problem is.
So then how would you suggest, if there's such a thing, as much as we would want it to happen, how can we really really advocate in order to remove teacher certification exams in New York City, or at least do something that is gonna give our students a better chance of becoming the best version of themselves,
right,
without limiting them and putting all these obstacles around them or in front of them?
Right. Well, I don't know. I think that teacher certification exams are here to stay. And I think that there are some that are valid. Not all of them are invalid. I think the ones that are heavily, in my days, it was the liberal arts and science test, which had a writing component that many of the both African American and student and Latinx students did not do well in. Now, we taught them to watch out for these features that were stigmatized, right? And I'm sure you have. I saw Leonard Lewis in the program, and I was interested because I remember that Leonard was hired when this whole issue started, right? The whole issue of teacher certification exams. And I know that when I was at LIU, we also had someone who worked with teaching students how to take the test. This is again one of the lessons that a woman in my literacy program taught me a long time ago, that you can actually teach someone to pass a test and not teach them anything, right? So you have to do it. That's the only way to get more students into the ranks of teachers of color, which are very, very important, teachers who really know the community. At the same time, I think you have to be advocates. That's why I think that the most important thing that Ms. Jones did was reveal, right? Reveal the injustice. You have to we can't get tired of revealing the injustice, saying this score doesn't mean what the student is capable of. It's a score, but it doesn't mean what the whole student, right? Holistically, what the student or teacher candidate is able to do. So I don't have an answer.
Sure. I think it gives us more things to think about and more maybe talks to organize to figure it out at some point. So you talked a lot about encouragements to resist categorizing, quote unquote, students. And you also spoke about white students more specifically during your discussion. So how do you reconcile these seemingly contradictory messages, or at least help some of us make sense out of them?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I use white, inspired by especially what Nelson Flores and Jonathan Rosa calls white listening subjects. And I think in their work on racial linguistic ideologies, and I think in at least the last paper we wrote together, we were very clear. I was very clear in saying the white listening subject is not always white, but it's someone that has institutional power, right? And I think that's it's more of a power category than a racial category, right? Because we know that, I think that what I said clearly, which I think is very important, is that we all know that race is a category that has been constructed. And what I wanted to emphasize is that language as a category has also been likewise constructed, and they were produced by colonialism, right? There were categories produced by, when the conquistadores arrived in what is today Latin America, in the Americas, they created these categories, right? They had never thought about them, but these categories were very useful to differentiate those that had power from those that did not have power. So thank you for that question. That was a good question.
Yeah, so now thinking about that along the line of race, how the DOE faced challenges, a lot of challenges, and the concept of racial equity in the classroom is a big one. So how would you, let's say Ms. Jones, address this concept in her classroom if Julia spoke maybe Garifuna and Spanish and maybe Wolof and, I don't know, French, right? Or Wolof and English, so to be consistent. And she soon has to take the ALA state test and NYE SLAT test. How do you think she would have managed to make that happen then?
That's why I made the point at the end, when I said I'm going to make a parenthesis here of differentiating between language as a social construct that, because it has power, we all have to deal with, right? And I think we have to sort of deal with it, right? I mean, I always say I don't want to leave the students that I work with and the teachers that I work with behind, right? I want to make sure that they come with me. So therefore, that's what they're facing. So so to me, that is important. That I forgot where I was going with this, but I mean, at that, ask the question again, and maybe I'll remember. I'm having the senior moment here.
Yeah, just how the concept of racial equity in the classroom. How do you think Ms. Jones would have addressed this concept in the classroom if Julia was to speak Garifuna and Spanish, let's say?
Oh, I know where I was going. I now know where I was going. So I was going to make sure that you understood the difference between all of this as social, and but this as cognitive, because what happens is people see these social differences that we've created, right? Black, Wolof, Spanish, right? If you want to talk about minoritized categories, right? And think of it as cognitively inferior, right? And this has nothing to do, but they're important social categories, right? They're important for your identity, right? Wolof is important to you. Being a Black woman is important to you. Being a Latina woman is important to me, right? So these are important social categories, but they have nothing to do with our cognitive ability. So I wanted to make that differentiation, which I think is important. And then the second differentiation is the one between process and product, right? So when Ms. Jones teaches in a classroom, like so many in New York City, she's an ESL teacher, after all, but that is completely linguistically and racially heterogeneous, right? Sometimes there are 23 languages, quote unquote, in one classroom. She's going to be able, she has to be able to allow the students to draw if they want to, when they want to draw from their full repertoire. Now, she's an ESL teacher, so she has to be able to be very clear about her goal. Her goal is to get students to produce this socially constructed academic English that we have socially imposed. but she has to make sure that she understands that the way to get them there is not by saying, all right, only this can be used, right? The way to get there is to be able to open up your resources. I always say, you know, it's like we're crazy. I mean, here you have a jewelry box with diamonds and pearls, and you say, no, this day you can only use, in bilingual classes, this day you can only use the diamonds, and that day you can only use the pearls. Why can't you use them together to show it off, you know? And this is what's so crazy and so limiting to me. So the process is one of opening up the gamut of resources as much as possible, right? But then the product sometimes can be going towards this, which is very narrow, but that's what socially is expected, right? So I think that that's what's important, that tension. And that's why I said you have to, as a teacher, you have to hold these two in tension. You have to sometimes look at the students and say, oh my God, she's so great. She can, you know, she can, I don't know, she can dance, she can sing, she's so great. But sometimes you have to look at her as an English learner, and you have to say, all right, you know, she's got to extend. See, that's the concept. The concept is she doesn't have to add this and forget about this, or even add and keep it. What she has to do is extend her repertoire, right? And then learn how to select which are the appropriate features at a given time. At home, when Isa speaks, she doesn't have to make a decision about whether the features that she selects are from what society calls English or society calls Spanish. She's soon going to learn when she goes to school that in school she has to select those that are English. But this is, again, it's a social learning. It's not cognitive in any way. Yeah.
Thank you. That was so. Time is flying, and we can do this, I think, more than 2 hours. But since we are very limited, I think since we opened up with, you know, CCNY and you being part of the School of Education, we wanna, at least I will ask one question that is gonna kind of wrap it up and bring it back to the school, the CCNY and CUNY in general. So in terms of course, policies, we have to kind of just brush a little bit. What policies, projects, or collaborations, or ideas, if you will, do you imagine could be implemented specifically at CUNY to continue the struggle for linguistic justice across the university? And now that we've lifted at least part of it, the veil, as we call it, what are some next steps that you think should be taken?
I think CUNY has the potential that no one else has. I mean, I think that CUNY is a unique institution. All of the campuses and the graduate center, unique in any kind of way. And we've made an incredible contribution to the city of New York. You know, it's not a day goes by when I don't go somewhere, the taxi, the physician assistant, and I say, where did you get trained? CUNY, you know, some campus. So I think that we first have to be very, very proud of what we've accomplished and what we are and what we do. You know, I've been fortunate enough to have been in a small at City College, at the Graduate Center, in a small private, and at what I thought was, you know, maybe, well, I don't even want to say it, but anyway, Teachers College, right, at Columbia. And I decided that I wanted to, you know, that I feel very privileged that I had the opportunity to go back to the public institution. And there's no place like it. You know, there is no place with the commitment, with the energy, with the students, because the students are what move us. The students move us to think differently. And by the way, this has always been like that. I remember when I was at City College, there was a time in which, and I used to have a friend who was, I don't know, somewhere in California. He always used to tell me, Ophelia, give me a reality check, because he knew that it was in Harlem where it was happening. Nowhere else was what was happening. And so I think that collaboration between the CUNY campuses is unique and important. And that is when we set up CUNY NYSIB, We set it up with faculty from across the CUNY campuses. And I'm very proud to say that I think what we built, the collaboration that we built between Queens, Brooklyn, Lehman, Hunter, City College, I think continues in the work that the young faculty is doing there. And I think they will not be moved. So proud of them and proud of what you've all been able to move.
Absolutely. Dr. Garcia, like I said, we have so many more questions, but since time is in the essence, I would like to personally thank you. Thank you. I think you've touched more lives than you could ever imagine. And your publications will forever leave and touch even more lives than you can ever think of. I second Dr. Dina Lopez when she says that you are an intellectual giant, and I respect you a lot. And I am so thankful that I had the opportunity to cross paths with you at the Graduate Center. And the honor is really ours, CCNY, School of Education, each one of us who were able, and the guest participants who were able to hear you tonight. You are an inspiration to many people. Your research changed more lives and will continue to change more lives. And I hope we will make sure to make as a pueblo, and Abyssal Thinking going forward. So thank you for your time and your talk tonight. We really appreciated you being here.
Aminata, I have to tell you, it's a real honor for me to be here, all right? And thank you for all you have taught me. Everything I am, I don't know, you talk about being a giant. I mean, I still feel like the stupid Cuban girl that someone first said when I first understood English. I still feel that way. And I said, how did I get here? But I got here through all of you, so gracias.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. I am going to turn the floor now to the Dean of the School of Education, Dr. Edwin Lamboy.
Ophelia, you did it again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I have enjoyed your talk so much. You have made me think about so many things, and I am so appreciative. Please know that the love that you feel for City College is the same love that us and many people feel for you. The fact that there are still 86 participants in this event, now 87. Oh well, an hour and 52 minutes into the event is a testament to that. Just a couple of quick thank yous. Thank you for reminding us that history is sometimes, well, not sometimes, it's pretty much always a combination of good things and bad things. You talked about the beginnings of City College and how that served as the foundation for what City College is today. I think it's important to own that, to recognize that, so that we can celebrate who we are today and what the City College School of Education is today. The principles that you talked about, thank you for bringing that up. They're still very important to us. And as a relatively new dean, thank you for reminding me about the importance of connections to communities. It tells me that I still have a lot of work to do in that area, and I appreciate it. Thank you for reminding us of very important topics, perennial topics, that teacher educators have to continue thinking about, like certification exams, for example. But I think the biggest lesson for me has been not only learning more about translanguaging and what you stand for in your practice, is the fact that you reminded us that if the School of Education, if City College, and if CUNY wants to claim that we really value diversity, we need to look at language too. Diversity comes in many different ways. Language is one of them. And having an understanding that being the speaker of the dominant language in the United States affords you things that other folks do not have. And we're here to serve everybody. So thank you for reminding us of that. I also want to take this opportunity, because this is the last official event of our centennial celebration, to thank Aminata and Catherine, who have been working together for, I would say, close to 2 years to plan all of these events. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we had to postpone a lot of our events, but look, we did it. And Aminata and Catherine, you did an amazing job. And I also want to thank Doris Grasserbauer, who is the director of the Multimedia Center, who has been with us organizing and putting all of these events together and actually taking care of all the different pieces that had to be taken care of for us to be able to communicate electronically via Zoom. So thank you. You see, you still have 87, Ophelia. It's because of you, not because of me or anybody else. So thank you. And good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us, from being part of this event. Good evening.